The two procurement nerds are back, recording in Vegas again. We stacked up and did a few episodes since we are together in the same town, and it is not 100 degrees. I'm shocked.
Gorgeous.
I was in Vegas 2 weeks ago and was freezing cold and needed a jacket, and it's kind of chilly today too. So
yeah, and I told you there's going to be a lot warmer this week. I think by the end of the week, it'll be warmer.
But 70s and 80s, it's supposed to be warmer in Vegas at this time. So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about the state of the procure tech market. And there's a lot that has gone on, especially since Dr. Eloise, you have retired. Is that the fair word to say your spider map?
Yes.
Which is when we would talk a lot about what's going on in the procure tech space. That has since been retired.
Retired.
You have a new evolution and something that will likely be coming out at some point. So my mind immediately goes to, when we think about the procure tech market, that there has been a lot of consolidation.
Yeah.
And I think some of it has been very big and public. And then some of it has kind of been flying under the radar with just acquisitions here and there over the last, 12 months or so that aren't making big news splashes, but are kind of big deals. So we know Coupa was taken private by Thoma Bravo. Obviously, that was a massive deal in 2023 for something like $8 billion. And then Jagger was acquired by Vista Equity Partners in 2024. We had ProcureTech M&A activity, which has grown almost from near zero in the 2000s to like 30 plus billion by 2025. So a big shift there. And then PE firms are kind of shifting, what matters and really moving away from the innovation and the creativity and focusing on more operations, getting into the nitty gritty and working on improving efficiency and cost cutting. Any other big ones that you want to add?
No, I think that frames it properly.
Okay. So that's a shift that's impacting procure tech. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the next 2 years with the rise of AI and some of these solutions that aren't just going to be able to adapt fast enough, and they're going to have to sell and or shut their door. So I think there's going to be some hard conversations going on there. Which then brings us to this idea of legacy tech versus new platforms versus productivity tools. So as we've had a lot of these acquisitions and we've had innovation happening, there's been kind of different types of tech, almost like 3 different tiers. So let's maybe unpack a little bit, Dr. Eloise, from your perspective, what these 3 different breakdowns look like, and maybe if there's any key ones that we want to highlight and talk through.
Well, first, I want to respond to the first part about all the M&A and PE consolidation, because when I look at my spider map, when I kind of go back and look, by the way, she's retired and sitting on the beach drinking Mai Tais. So she's very happy in retirement.
We should join her for an episode or 2.
The amount that of the procure tech companies that are owned by private equity is kind of staggering. You look around.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. And that happened quietly. Like that, I wasn't paying close enough attention, and because I was focused on all things AI, but that happened quietly. And it's like, oh my God, what happened? All the risk providers, those that remain of ESG, such that was all private equity owned. Most of the big players are private equity. The big suites are private equity owned, and a handful of others. And I'm not in the M&A realm, but I talk to enough people that are out there making bids and taking offers. There's a lot of folks that are up for sale, and I kind of get asked about this a little bit architecturally. When I look at those, I'm like, there's no value in these companies. I mean, if you're going to buy
meaning
them,
their legacy and
they're
kind of dinosaur.
Yeah, because and it's bad luck and bad timing. Like, so I'm not even criticizing anybody, but most of these tech companies, like the only value is the data. So, I mean, if I were to buy 1 or 5, I'd just strip out all the application and just throw it away and sunset the customers or migrate them somehow. But I would not support that legacy tech. I just want the data. And I would build some mega, or take all that data and do something compelling with AI. Again, AI native on top of all that data. So that's sort of the background. So then as we look at the legacy tech versus new platforms versus AI tools, I mean, I don't think it's a surprise that I really dislike the legacy tech, the source to pay providers. And I'm going to call them out. So Ariba, Coupa, iValua, Zycus, Oracle, and Jagger, done. Like, I mean, private equity owns most of those, and it certainly owns Jagger, Zycus, iValua, Coupa, not Oracle, not Ariba. I mean, what does private equity want? Money.
They want to sell.
So those have become ATM machines for private equity. And I'm not criticizing, I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying that's the reality. So like that roadmap that they all had that in their vision boards, done. This innovation thought, done. Even all this AI nonsense that they think they're doing, done. This is just a money grab. Again, I'm not judging, just pointing out this is a money grab, and they're going to sweat those assets for every dollar they can. And
so do we think these massive companies that have invested millions and millions of time and resources in these tools are going to pull the plug? And if so, when?
Yes, over the next 10 years. I mean, I think realistically. So I don't want to say it's going to happen in 26 and 27. That would be naive. But again, there's so much better out there. And let's just be honest, as I wrote an entire book about, these legacy providers failed to deliver on the promise. They promised the world and delivered coal.
And with new CEOs coming in.
Yeah, but those CEOs are there just to drive sales and to get out in front of customers. And I'm sure they're well compensated, and hooray for them. I'm happy for them. But don't confuse that with what some of these new platforms are doing.
So I've noticed, I don't know, maybe the last 14 months or so, orchestration has kind of been the, I don't know if it's fair to say the buzzword in Procure Tech, but I feel like everyone has been trying to say their intake, their orchestration, some combination of it. Even the legacy players have tried to pivot towards that messaging as well. So what does it mean for these new platforms then? With their current focus on intake and orchestration, do you think they're going to build up enough clientele and enough, market share where they'll be able to expand and leverage and really grow into something larger?
Oh, no doubt. They're already doing that. I mean, Zip, looks like Coupa, just a new version of Coupa in terms of the breadth of their capabilities. I mean, they'd say intake to pay. They're pretty much, you got contracting, at least contract intelligence, which is all you need. They've got sourcing now. They've got onboarding. It's a full-on proper suite. And LevelPath's making the same play, and they're not being coy about it. I think I would see some of the others as being more, okay, well, you have SAP, so let's layer on an orchestration and an intake platform. That's okay. I'm okay with that. It's a slightly different space, but if you're going to market because SAP is rolling out a new version of Ariba, you're taking a very, very, very close look at Zip and LevelPath, because those are really the most comparable systems, except they're AI native, or more or less. I don't know enough of the technical specs to make that, but they're both talking about being AI native.
And do we think with the rise of these new platforms, we're going to see less solution providers?
Yes.
Because there'll be more, you can do more with one investment versus needing to buy 5 or 10 niche category solutions.
Yeah, and the thing you'll notice is both Zip and LevelPath have agent builders, and others, I think Oro does too, and I can't remember who else. This is what happens when you get old. But the fact that they have agent builders, they're really sort of setting up shop that you'll do source to pay or intake to pay plus some agents. And if you then factor in that enterprise has Claude or Gemini or whatever, then you're going to use that and integrate into those platforms. So yeah, I think that's legitimately fewer solutions, maybe bigger investments. And let's not forget, there's sort of the vibe coding, because Sarah Fryer, the CFO at OpenAI, she talks about how her team's 18% the size of comparable companies, simply because her people just code directly, which you would expect at OpenAI. Yeah. But how long till that becomes a trend? And all of a sudden, other tech companies do that. And then all of a sudden, you have big enterprises doing that.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got kind of a third bucket, which is productivity tools. I don't know what else we're calling those, but that's things like, I guess, a fair market. Would that fall? Scout B, maybe, Leverage AI. So that's a whole nother layer. And where do you see that fitting in? We just talked about the intake and orchestration disruptors. What about these productivity solutions?
So I would probably, I wouldn't put Scout B in there. I can't let that go. I think we are seeing new solution providers that are interesting and different than what we thought about, because I was recently in Paris at the Spend HQ conference, where they just, right before they announced the acquisition of Sligo. And so you take Spend HQ with all this data, and you now put a legit AI platform on top. And we've talked about Sligo before, because I've been a big fan of what Matt built ever since I saw it. That's a new platform too, but has nothing to do with outright intake to pay. It's a platform, but it's sort of different.
Yeah, it's so expanding what they're doing.
Yeah. So it's, and I think the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and all these analyst reports, I think they've done a terrible job categorizing these solutions for the last 10 years. And it's only going to get worse, because how do you do the Spend HQ with the Sligo and compare that against Zip? They're different, but they're the same. And then a fair market, which has pivoted, to their credit. And so they've got some legit AI or, automation for tail spend. And as they're pivoting, what does that look like? And it's not going to look like anything we have, historically had. But also, you look at Flip-Through, which is this really sophisticated, I would call it super agent, or maybe even AI employee around negotiations. And then you have Rivio that has their own AI employee that called Sheldon. And so, or named Sheldon. So we have these innovations, to say nothing of Notebook LM, Google Gemini's, that I'm a huge fan of, which I think completely changes how you do category management. So this whole other productivity tools is a wide ranging, and it's hard to pin down in terms of a quadrant.
Mm-hmm. So this leads me to something that I've really become interested in, and have done a lot of research, especially because it impacts, I think, procurement practitioners so much. I mean, it impacts all of us, but how do you negotiate as a procurement practitioner when pricing models have been kind of blown up? And then as an AI provider, how do you charge? Yep. Because there's still a lot of unknown on how to actually do that from the vendor side. So I kind of see three major pricing models, and let me know, Dr. E, if there's another one that you think we should mention. But per seat, which is very traditional, old school, probably most of us are used to this. I have 100 users. I pay per user, not tied to value.
Right.
It's really, really user-based. Then now, which is new, we have the consumption-based, which is what we often talk about when we say tokens or per API call or per workflow. This is flexible, but it's very unpredictable.
Yeah.
So finance leadership in particular, not a fan because how do you set and manage a budget when you don't know how to even estimate what consumption is going to be? And one of the reasons I think you can't estimate is because the AI tools are changing capabilities so much. I couldn't have told you 6 months ago how I was going to be using Claude Code today.
Yeah.
No way. So there's so much changing. The consumption piece is hard. And then one that I've heard a little bit more about is what I call outcome-based pricing. And this is like, for example, would be like per resolution. So if I'm an ITSM platform, which is IT service management, so ticketing, and I close or solve a ticket, that would be an outcome.
Mhm.
Problem, solution. If I am on the marketing side and I'm running a motion and I am trying to outbound or get contact information for a leader company and I have a success in that. Or you could tie it to dollar savings. So we need to save $10 million. We're going to leverage some tool or platform to help us do that. And that's going to be the trigger. So those are kind of the three main ones that I'm seeing in the market and discussed. Anything else
No,
that
those
you're
are the
seeing
three.
across your
Yeah.
clients?
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing is kind of a hybrid right now.
Mhm.
So we've got the per seat still in most contracts that are often have, long-term 3-5 year plays. But then you're seeing companies introduce consumption-based midway through contracts because they're selling new products and services into the mix. So it's kind of a mixed bag right now. And I think it's really hard for procurement practitioners to figure it out. And I think it's important to you got to stay on it. You've got to learn. You've got to do your research. You've got to come to the table with options and be willing to be flexible.
Absolutely. I think the per seat's done because as AI comes into the fold, I don't need user-based. Like if I have 1,000 people today, I'm not going to have 1,000 people tomorrow. So while that's forecastable, it's not particularly useful. Consumption-based, I think, okay, so this is a plug for our live podcast recording next week at the Connect House conference where we're going to talk about data centers. Yeah. However, just to sort of tease one element of that, the entirety of the consumption-based model is the idea that your models are running and your platforms are running in data centers, and data center costs are at a premium. So what happens, and this is one of the hot takes I'm going to bring in next week, is what happens if those models run locally, whether on the device or in behind the firewall. So I'm not incurring overt electricity charges or water or some of these other things. And as these processors get more efficient, like the consumption based is modeled on all of these data center economics that may not be relevant in a couple of years. And so, which gets to like, we might be overbuilding data centers. I don't know. We'll have to debate that next week. And then the outcome-based is interesting because that's how consulting has been running for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And having kind of run row seat to that in my time at Kearney, that doesn't work either because...
Well, it's hard because as the buyer, you have to put a value on something.
Right.
Which you often don't. Every little thing I do, I don't necessarily have a value attached to it.
Right. Which is why ESG and procure to pay and risk have all suffered because there's not an implicit or a hard dollar savings. But even if we're going to source a new whatever provider, like there's negotiated savings, but then there's actualized savings. The two are very, very different. And most consulting is negotiated savings, but you lose the value by the time you implement the contract. So, I'm a little skeptical there. The only thing that I have seen is where there's some sort of device or some sort of IoT device. So where you have, I think it was like, if you put these energy modulators, like as an example, in data centers or in big, large industrial situations where they modulate energy usage or water usage. And the moment that they turn things down, you can associate a cost savings with it right then and there. So that creates that value, that now outcome base. So I'll buy that. And even in your examples, if I can close that customer service ticket without it escalating to a human because you have some special AI in that, then I can quantify that. But I think those models are still a little wonky. But I do think there is potential, but it needs a lot of thought.
Have you heard from anyone on the supply side of how they're rethinking selling their platform?
Yes, but nobody has answers, and I certainly don't. I'm not a finance person, and I definitely am not a pricing person because I don't sell. I'm more of a messaging person, so I try to avoid those conversations. But yes, this is literally the question that comes up: is how do you price this stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. I don't know that it's going to be ever figured out, but I think we'll make progress. I mean, even this year, I think we've come a long way just from when you look back 6 months ago to now.
But, like as with everything, it seems like there's always an article of, some company blowing through their tokens, their AI tokens. And it was funny, like it was earlier this year, McKinsey and some others were showing their token trophies of like they use so many tokens, which I don't like. That's just burning cash to me. It's like if you're not tying this token usage to outcomes. Yeah, I was like, what are we doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I again will have, I'm sure, a lot more pricing discussions as we have future podcast episodes this year because there's a lot happening and it's become very public.
Yeah.
I feel like people are really vocalizing and talking about how hard this is on both sides of the table.
Yeah, exactly. Because these startups want to make money, or even the bigger AI platforms need to make money. And yet the companies, if you've used to paying so much, like, I don't know, $100 a license per person, and that goes up 10 or 20% every year, that's like very predictable.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's like, nobody knows, but it could just go like billions of dollars, and like it's creating a lot of.
Well, I think companies are having to put stopgaps in place very quickly to have triggers and alerts in place because you could easily blow through massive amounts in 24 hours if you don't.
And we're seeing that. We're seeing that already. And by the way, being that I'm older, I've seen this movie before. This is exactly what happened in 2008 to 2012 when cloud computing became a thing. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, hey, dump everything into the cloud. All of a sudden, you're consuming massive amounts of cloud infrastructure, and your cost savings we just blew past them at 80 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. So one other topic that I kind of want to close out around our discussion is AI a feature or a foundation?
Oh, it's a foundation. It is fundamental. And this is going to define the next generation of, let's call it IT. But I would even argue, as I was sort of arguing in my book, that this is foundational to the business model. Legacy businesses were built on the idea, especially post-World War II, the idea that humans are the transmitters of information. And when information's incomplete, they make judgments on how to deal with that incomplete information. And if you can step away from that, and I'm not saying that's easy, but if you can step away from that and use AI at the center of your communication and your execution of a business, and even the evaluation and judgment of certain things, the Claude deleting the database notwithstanding, then we have a new way of operating. And AI is foundational to both the architecture and the business model.
Yeah. Which is interesting to think how that's going to impact ProcureTech?
Oh yeah, I mean it's like if it's not obvious, ProcureTech is in serious trouble.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see in the next couple of years.
As is legacy transactional systems.
I would argue legacy anything.
Yeah, right. No, I agree. Like Salesforce, Workday, SAP, Oracle. Like I do think this is fundamental.
All right. Anything else you want to close out?
The only thing I would say, because we talked a lot about AI, is all going to come down to those people that want to remain. You got to learn this quickly and learn it now, because these changes. I mean, look at how much. I mean, like we're just batting these topics back and forth, and we're talking very casually about massive changes. And I think the world is changing, and if you're a procurement person, just the job of procurement has to change. And then more importantly, the company you work for, like it's not like mediocrity is not going to survive.
That's a wrap. We will be back next Wednesday.